Okay, so we actually finished the seventh class, and there's one more that I want to teach afterwards, maybe two more, but one more. The rest of them were not exactly things I can teach. Were more like meetings that the Rav had with the staff. But before we do that, so I thought we should take a short break and spend 1 week, or maybe two, on a topic that I feel, at least for me, has been essential. And having just come back from America, I saw that it's probably the hottest and most important topic to speak about. And it's really, really getting to people. And I thought that we should be talking about it. So here's a handout. If you have with you a Tanakh, so you can look at Isaiah chapter 2, starting with verse 3. But we're going to get to that in a minute. So the introduction is, without mentioning any names, that I was approached in Los Angeles. I saw this everywhere, but in Los Angeles, two very interesting discussions with people. One of them was an incredibly bullying discussion, which is okay. I don't mind. People have their things. Luckily, I can see it for what it is and not be too stressed over it. But the discussion was because I mentioned that it might be possible that, the discussion was really how what Corona did to people was that it threw them into a spiral of fear, of intense fear. And a lot of people stopped their lives, basically. And not just a lot of people, but basically the governments all over the world stopped people's lives. So I'm not very good at conspiracy theories, so I don't try to advocate them. But I think what I see more is that there's a lot of mistakes that are made because of fear. That's usually what governs most of the mistakes that are done at a national level, and many of the mistakes that we have in life as individuals. Fear of something. And fear makes you make mistakes. Big ones sometimes. So before I get into the discussion there, I'll tell a story that I believe I told here. I'm not sure, because this happened to me before I left for America. There was a man when Corona started who I got the questionable job of telling everybody in shul that we'll be davening as usual and continuing on, and there's no reason to none of this and that, and keep going with your regular lives.
When was this?
2 years ago, when Corona started.
March 15th. Right after Purim?
Right after Purim. Right after Purim.
You were saying this right after Purim.
Right, because you remember our class here. It said that this is more of a systemic problem. It's not really related to the individual, but because they're concerned about the medical system breaking down. So they're going to impose all kinds of rules and limitations and this and that, but it really doesn't touch on the individual. And the individual can't look at it the same way that the system does, because the system has its own concerns. And I wrote a long post about it on Facebook in Hebrew, trying to explain the difference between thinking about things when you're part of a system and thinking about things as an individual, and why the system cannot cater to the individual's needs. The system cannot see an individual. If it starts seeing an individual, then either it's messianic, it's an incredible achievement, or it's a very bad system which is going to fall. Usually a system that caters to an individual is called a corrupt system. That's usually how we call it. Because imagine that the municipality would cater to individual needs and not look at the needs of the many, right? So you don't want that situation. It's not a good situation. But there's a corollary to that, which means that I, as an individual, don't have to cater to the system. It goes in both ways. They can't look at me, and I certainly don't have to look at them. Meaning, we have different concerns in mind, and you really have to separate these in your head. Now, the problem is that they have the media and you don't. So they're blasting their message over the media constantly, trying to get their point of view to be recognized and respected, which is okay. I mean, that's their job. But the most average people don't have the ability to filter that message out correctly. And instead it becomes like they are talking to you. And we've talked about that in Torah Nefesh many times, that an overblown ego causes a person to think that when they're talking on the radio, they're talking about him. And you listen to the radio, the schizophrenics really have this in a bad way, which is that the radio told me to go kill someone. Right? Mamish could be at that level. That you think there is a hidden message in what's being said. Well, you don't have to be schizophrenic to think that when the media is presenting a certain point of view, that is for you. Because the media seems to be talking to each one of us individually. Really, that's what they're trying to do, but you have to be smart enough to filter it out and to understand that they're talking to the public, and you're not the public. It's not the same thing. You should have your own agenda, and you should be looking out for your own concerns. Again, not out of a egotistic or egocentric stance, but out of understanding that in the same way that I don't want the system to cater to my whims, I certainly understand that I shouldn't be ruled by their needs. It's a two-way street. So you have to make this distinction. So I had this questionable pleasure of addressing our shul when Corona started, and I tried to explain this. And I said one of the things that we need as a community is to stick together, and we need to be able to continue with our lives. And a very important part of our lives is our spiritual needs. We can't put that aside. So, if it was such a situation in which you are over 60, maybe 70. At the time I thought it was 70, maybe it's a little bit less. And you suffer from obesity, and you suffer from this, and you suffer from that, you should take more precautions. And maybe those precautions should include davening outside, because our shul is built in such a way that we have a door and a very, very accessible, we're open to the street, basically. So it's very accessible. And that should be enough. You don't need to do more than that. There was this one member of our shul, and there was okay, I understand. And why was he so angry? He was so angry because he had a very difficult heart condition. And apparently he had open heart surgery at a young age even. I don't know his full medical history. I understood later that he was very afraid of Corona. So he really blew up, and the truth was he didn't come back for almost 2 years. And I called him a few times. We remained on good terms personally, but he really blew up at the approach. He couldn't stand it.
What did he think it should be?
Okay, so I'll tell you what happened. So suddenly he showed up, I think it was 2-3 months ago, he showed up again. And the interesting thing was that when he left 2 years ago, he was like a regular North African, French, Sephardi gentleman. That was like, he dressed that way, and he liked Chabad, but he wasn't like in any way a Lubavitcher. When he showed up again, he came dressed like me. He came with a kapata, with a hat. He doesn't have a beard yet, but I don't know if. So I think I said this here, that I don't have a habit of asking people, why did you change? Or why, if they want to tell me, they'll tell me. So it turns out that he wanted to tell me because he felt it was connected. Yeah. So he told me the whole story. He says, look, after that Shabbos that you explained how, again, it's not me even, I don't run the shul. I was just selected as the spokesperson. So so after you presented how the shul wanted to conduct itself with Corona, I felt that this was dangerous for me, and I really disrespected everyone for it. Not personally, but I felt that it was the wrong place for it, and I left completely. And the truth is that I didn't just leave the shul, I left everything. I left my job, he stopped his entire life. And when there were lockdowns, so he locked himself down, not for like a month at a time, or he basically said, I locked myself down for almost 2 years. I haven't been out of the house. And he said, I was in terrible fear the whole time that I was going to get corona and was going to die. And that was like, it was present all the time. Nobody came into their house, nobody left. Eventually, they have 2 older kids that live with them. The kids left the house because they couldn't stand his anxiety. Like, it was just unbearable. And he says what happened was that, he says about 4 months ago, meaning 4 months from now, like a month before I met him again, and he was suddenly dressed this way. He says, I went to the supermarket, and he says, I was wearing 2 pairs of gloves, like a full body, like one of those hazmat suits, but not the big ones, but like something you can put under a coat and a coat over it, and had the 95 mask plus another mask, and a hat, like a really wide hat, so that people wouldn't get near me, and sunglasses, and like trying to hide as if he's not there, because he had to go to the supermarket. There was something he needed right away, and they couldn't deliver it, and he just had to go. So he risked it. That in itself sounds a little strange, but okay. So he goes to the supermarket, he gets what he needs, and he runs to the cashier, and there's a line. So he tries to keep away from in front of him, behind him, and all's going well until, as he's about to get to the cashier, somebody decided to leave the supermarket. But you have to leave through the line, so he had to go next to him. Not only did he go near him, he actually brushed up against him. Yeah. And he says, and when that happened, when I felt someone touching me, I exploded. Mm-hmm. He says, I yelled at him, how could you do this to me? You killed me. He says he was in a tirade, and then because he's a very gentle and smart man, yeah. he went back home and he said, what's happened to me? What have I become? Mm-hmm. And he says he had to detox from this whole picture of reality that he was in. So my wife said it was very interesting when I told her the story. So she said he still needed some kind of protection, so now he's got this this on, which could be true. It could be also that it was a sign of I've moved sides, meaning I saw that during Corona there were 2 approaches. 2 communal approaches. One was the system is very nice, we're not against it, but we're going to continue with our lives, which was pretty much the Haredi approach, and schools will continue no matter what, and we're not stopping our lives because of this. And the other approach, which was everything that comes out of the TV is holy, and we have to keep it that way, and that was the other approach. And I think that he moved. And that's what I saw his change in garb representing, a movement in terms of his understanding. Okay, so that was one story that happened before I went to America, and I realized that, I also talk to people, that the fear level is very high still, and people are just beginning to come off of it. But there's no easy way to stop an addiction. And fear is an addiction. You have to understand that once fear sets in, once anxiety sets in, it's a type of addiction. It's very hard for you to justify your existence without it. So people become fear junkies. And so they find it very difficult to let go of the fear. So if there's no real fear anymore in Corona, what will happen is that they'll substitute it for something else. And that'll happen a lot. And so you're in this whirlwind of fears coming and going over things that maybe 10 years ago nobody would have even looked twice at. Like this thing with, here's the new one, in America, the new one is food shortages. Okay. Is there any food shortage in America? No, there's absolutely no food shortage. But people are fearful of this suddenly. They're really afraid. And the war in Ukraine, and they know that Ukraine produces some grains, and so does Russia, and their gas prices have gone up a lot, but they have to ask the question, is there any gas station that I've ever seen that doesn't have gas? I mean, the price has gone up, it's true, but there's no gas shortage. So now they found a shortage in something, in baby food, in baby formula, which is completely, doesn't matter. The point is...
The only way is to stop listening to the media.
Right.
Turn off your
That's 100% true. That's the best option. That's the best option, without a question. But then I presented this in a shul in Los Angeles. I was talking about this, and I wanted to talk about something entirely different. I don't remember why it came up exactly. But in the course of presenting these ideas about anxiety and about fear, I happened to mention that, well, I said that the most important thing you can do when faced with a situation like Corona is to decide at some point that you are not going to be changing your life. Meaning your life has to go on. You have to make sure that your life goes on, because this is not a big enough risk or a risk for your health that you should stop your life. If the bubonic plague was raging on the streets and people were dying in the masses, you would have to reconsider. It's a different situation. But given what Corona was, this was a threat to the system, not a threat to the individual, and it's a very different type of thinking. And we said this 2 years ago.
That it's a threat to some individuals.
Yes, and he says there are some individuals who are more at risk.
Yes.
Still, the risk is very low. It's not the bubonic plague, not even close to it.
No.
It's not even close to SARS. It's not close to any of the serious viruses that we've seen in the last 1,000 years. And yet, the right way to deal with it is not by closing yourself off. That is the worst option. You have to take certain precautions. You take precautions which the media and, again, the system selling this was telling everyone to take these precautions plus another 100%, which was unwarranted at all and nothing to do with children not going to school. Is one of the most, that's not a theoretical threat, that is a clear and present danger to their psychology. And, okay, but let's put that aside. And one of the things I mentioned was that perhaps the vaccine could help you. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think the verdict is still out. So I mentioned this as a possibility, not as something that I think you should or shouldn't. I'm not the person to decide what you should or shouldn't do. And a day later, this woman called me up, and she, mamish, yelled at me for 20 minutes. How dare I? And she called it the poison something. I'm like, where did this come from? So I know that there were people that were trying to sell this as a, and these are the conspiracy theorists, right? That this is an attempt to kill off population. And to me, that speaks more about the level of fear that people are living in. So here you have this very interesting thing. Here are the people who, and I want us to think about this for a minute. They're the people who are against precautions. They don't believe really that corona is, maybe some of them don't believe it exists, but those are really crazy. But they don't believe that it presents a real danger to them. On the other hand, the vaccine is worse. And the vaccine is certainly, it's not just that it's poison, it's a premeditated attempt to kill people. It's known to kill, and that's why they're giving it. So you have this very interesting situation that the people who should have been fearless, because they don't believe that the whole thing is real or it's overblown, they understand. So you would expect them to be very calm and go about their lives and everything's fine. Suddenly they're in another whirlwind of their own, which is taking under, and there's so many conspiracy theories going on, and so many of these people are locked into these. So what is going on? And then I see that even the people who are normal, who understand the difference, even they understand the difference between system and individual. They understand what it means that I should be looking at my own needs and not at the system's needs. They understand that division. And they took the vaccine as part of their precautions. Maybe they're over 70, maybe not, doesn't matter. But now they're in, and this was the second conversation I had, I was thrown into this conversation of, should I be stocking food? You're looking at the amount of food that's thrown out every day, in America. And someone's asking you, should I be stocking food? And then you look at the people. So not yes. Present company not included, right? But you look at the people, you look at how big they are. Yes. And you're saying, if there was a food shortage, you would probably live another 10 years.
Someone's stuck in it.
You would probably enjoy better health if there was a food shortage, because you're eating way too much. You don't need everything you're eating. And it's one of the worst it's one of the worst medical disasters of the modern world, is this overeating. So you would actually benefit from it, even if there was, but there isn't, because look at people and look at what's going on. Look at the amount of food that's being thrown out. What are you talking about?
Again, it's the media creating this scare.
Okay.
This petrifying.
Right. So I can keep blaming the media.
You don't have media. You get people like that phone in and say, 20 minutes on. You hear this thing and that thing. It's good to have a balance sometimes. Too much is never good. It's got to be done in moderation to see what is really going on.
You have to have a filter in your head.
Moderation anymore.
But you have to.
We have to decide.
That's
right.
it. It's you that has to decide what to listen to. But you have to listen a bit, because otherwise you're going to maybe just be in with a group of people that are talking.
Yeah.
Let me add another facet to this. So all this is about what you would call, I don't know, like fringe things going on. Well, Corona wasn't fringe, it was everywhere, but in the end it was fringe. Now there's something else. I was staying with someone who was very close to me and happens to be very liberal, very, very, very liberal. So she tells me, she's related to me, she tells me we're thinking maybe we need to leave America. I'm saying, why? She says, because this is becoming a place that doesn't respect anymore human rights and civil rights. I'm saying, really? Well, where do you see that? The freest place in the world. So she tells me, because they now are talking about overturning Roe versus Wade. So this is a sign. Okay, Roe versus Wade was a very important case that allowed abortion in America. It was a Supreme Court case from the 60s, I think, sometime in the 60s. And now Americans are becoming more conservative in a certain sense, and they don't want to allow abortions. Okay. By the way, America is the most liberal of the entire world right now, except for one thing. I think you still can't get an abortion pill by ordering it in the mail. I think that's the only thing that you can't do. In some states, in other states it is permissible. In any case, so I'm like, what? So if Roe versus Wade is overturned in certain places, so that's going to mean that America is a place that doesn't respect, I mean, you're not going to be free anymore? Does that mean you're going to be persecuted as Jews? What does that mean exactly? And I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and all I can see is fear. I'm seeing the fear again. The fear of something terrible about to happen. So I'm thinking about this, and I come to the realization the issue is not corona, the issue is not food shortages, the issue is not UFOs, and it's not Roe versus Wade. This is not the issue. The issue is fear itself. What is going on with fear? And so I'm thinking that, wait a minute, I haven't been understanding the prophets properly. They've been saying it all along, and I've known that they say it, and Chassidus says it a lot, and I just didn't understand it because I kept thinking that fear had to mean the way that the prophets describe it, and not fear in general. So I want to show you what is going on here. So let's see Isaiah chapter 2. Okay, how do the prophets, and all the prophets have a prophecy like this? I chose Isaiah because of all the prophets, he's considered to be the nicest. He has very little rebukes. He has a few. It's not that he doesn't have any, but of all the prophets, Isaiah is considered to be a very messianic prophet. He talks a lot about the end of days, and he doesn't picture them as some calamity. He usually pictures them as a very good time period. But listen to what he says at the outset of his book, in chapter 2. O house of Jacob, come let us walk by the light of the Lord. For you have forsaken the ways of your people, O house of Jacob, for they are full of practices from the east, and of soothsaying like the Philistines. They abound in customs of the foreign nations. Meaning, what does he say? What is he saying? Let's return to the path of the house of Jacob. Why? To the light of the Lord, to the light of Hashem. Why? Because you've forsaken these ways. You've gone off the derech. Their land, meaning the land of the house of Jacob, meaning Eretz Yisrael. Really, he's talking also in his time, not just to the end of time. He's also talking relevant to the people that are living in his time, and the sort of the last third of the first temple period. Their land is full of silver and gold. There is no limit to their treasures. Their land is full of horses. There is no limit to their chariots. So what is he saying? He's saying, why do you cling to these foreign practices? Because they're good for trade. They're good for making money. So your goal in life has become to bring gold and silver into the land of Israel. That's your purpose. And your purpose isn't following God. And their land is full of idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have wrought. But man shall be humbled, and mortal brought low. Oh, do not forgive them. It's like he's saying this to God. Do not forgive them. Maybe he's saying it to God. Maybe he's saying it to the people who are willing to listen to them, to him. Man shall be humbled. What does that mean? That your arrogance in pursuing a life that is dedicated to gold and silver, to foreign relations, instead of looking inward and developing your connection with God and your connection with one another, right? At the expense of your connection with one another, you go to seek foreign connections with foreign people. And you can say that that's very much a situation that we're all suffering from. That shall be humbled. Go deep into the rock, bury yourselves in the ground before the terror of Hashem and His dread majesty. So he says, how is all this going to be humbled? By terror, by fear. The word in Hebrew is just pachad. I don't know why they translated it as terror, but it's really fear. Fear of Hashem. What is he saying? He's saying that there is going to come a time, and we'll read it in a moment as he says it even more clearly, there's going to come a time that fear is going to engulf reality. And he calls it the fear of God. And all the years I thought that what that means is that people will suddenly become aware that everything is godly. They have to recognize the godliness in their lives. Oh, there's fear everywhere. I began to understand. It's never so simple. It's never so black and white. Rather, there's fear in the atmosphere. Sense, who understands what's going on, translates that as a sign to fear God. And a person who doesn't know that that is what the message is, so it just translates into fear, random fears from different things that have no meaning really. But it's almost like everybody's in a state of chemically induced fear. That's what this prophet is saying, and all the other prophets say something similar. There's going to come a time when fear is going to permeate the atmosphere. Except, you're not going to know what to fear. So most of the people are going to fear for their money, for their lives. Again, money, you could say that's inflation, recession, depression, whatever you want. Imagine, there's a word you're not allowed to say in the American government. You know that, right? There is an R word. Certainly the D word you can't say. The R word in the American government is recession. You're not allowed to say that word. You can never say that. And the other word for sure, if you were ever caught saying this word, the D word, depression, there's no hope for you. You'll be kicked out forever. You're out of Washington. These are words that you can't say because they promote so much fear in people that it's the end of the world. Because we know that everybody who lived through the Great Depression didn't live. Everybody died, right? It's a known fact that nobody made it through the Great Depression, right?
Well, my mother's still alive.
Yeah,
She still talks
yeah.
about it.
My father made it through it also, and he's not alive anymore. But my mother's alive, and she made it through it. And then they were in the worst place in the world to be in the Great Depression. They were here, where the Great Depression, when it struck, was really bad in the 1930s here.
Does
Anyway.
it still affects her?
Of course it affects.
Oh,
It affects in the sense
life.
that the way, well, for my parents it was how they treated food.
Ah, okay.
But that's a good thing. Anyway, the president who was most in touch with this and understood what was going on, and he knew what was going on. He was the one who really knew because he was in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He knew all these things. And then he spoke to the people, and you have to say, he's a great man for saying it. It's Kennedy, who said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. So that's not exactly true, because we have nothing to fear but God. If he would have said that, he would have been the president forever, because even the Christian right would have embraced him, and because he was very liberal. So I don't think that he had their support. But if he would have said that, he would have known that. But this idea that there's going to come a time of fear, we have to understand that some of what we feel, some of what we experience, or maybe a great deal of it, is not because of our own experiences. It's because there's a zeitgeist, there's a atmosphere in the world. And the prophets at least connect this with a higher revelation of godliness that's coming down. And as it comes down, it at first is uncontainable. And so it causes fear. But not everybody understands, or very few people understand, that this is not a negative thing. It's actually a positive thing. But since they don't know how to interpret it, it becomes something that terrorizes them. And they have to find what the source of the fear is. So people latch on to stuff. And so you've got people thinking that maybe in Los Angeles, where there's more food than in Africa, in one city eats and throws out more than an entire continent, maybe we need to stock up on food because we don't have enough. But that's like, where are you living? I understand. It's the fear. The fear is translated, and the fear has to have a container. It has to go into something. So they take it into these random problems that either are meaningful or not meaningful, but certainly don't have the proportion that they're giving them. When we look in Chassidus, we see that in the first generation of Chassidus, there was a lot of talk about fear. First, second, third generations. There was a lot of talk about fear. And the one that's most famous was what Reb Nachman said, that the entire world is a narrow bridge, and the most important thing is not to have fear. That's Reb Nachman. But the exact quote from him is a little bit different. He says, and the most important thing is not to make yourself afraid. Because he says, really the fear, there's a natural fear in trying to cross a narrow bridge. And it's good that there's a natural fear. There should be. You should be careful. That's what fear does. It's your friend in that sense. But when you make yourself overly afraid, then you're not going to be able to cross any bridges. You're not going to be able to take any chances in life. What does it mean to fear God? What does it mean to take the fear that is in the air and transform it into fear of God? So for that we have to define God. What does it mean to fear God? So this was talked about a great deal by the Baal Shem Tov and by the Maggid and by the Alter Rebbe. And they say very simply, the fear of God means that I fear my higher purpose. It's my fear that I won't perform, that I won't act, that I won't be able to do what I was meant to do in this lifetime. Now, you can dream big and think that you're meant to conquer the world. You can dream big and think you're meant to be a billionaire. But that's not the type of purpose I'm talking about. I'm talking about the simple purposes. That if a person cannot daven in a minyan, he's got a problem. So if Corona is preventing you from davening in a minyan, you've got a real problem. You should be fearful of that. You have to ask. You have to weigh things. You have to think. If the fear is preventing my children from going to learn, going to school, and becoming educated, and being with friends, learning how to be sociable, that is a real fear. Because that is going to prevent them from being able to fulfill their purpose in life. The real fear is the fear that I won't take the necessary risks to lead my life. And life is always, as Reb Nachman says, a narrow bridge. Or as it said in Chabad, you can't always cross over an iron bridge. You don't always have the luxury of things being so set and so clear and so easy to do that they're like an iron bridge that they were walking on. Most of the time, or a lot of the time, we encounter challenges, and these challenges are difficult, and they need us to take a risk or a chance to negotiate them. And if you don't do that, then you're missing out on life. And again, I'm not saying that you have to become the richest person in the world or to receive 10 Nobel Prizes or even one or even get any prize. I'm talking about the day-to-day life, which is what every human being needs to perform, needs to live, needs to do. If it's preventing you from those things, you can't take those, call them risks, in order to live that way, then you're in real trouble. Because that you should be fearful of God in that sense, because God put you here for a purpose. I'm not saying that there are not a person who's sick in bed. The Rebbe was never sick in bed. It's not true. How is it possible? He never had a cold? Of course he did. But he decided that it was more important for him to go and work than it was for him to stay in bed. So he never stayed in bed. When he had a heart attack, so he weighed the risks, and he said, if I leave now, it's a very interesting way of thinking, if I leave 770, I don't know how or when I'll come back. So he decided to stay. He just had a heart attack. He says, okay, I'll stay in my office. And if the doctors need to bring something, I'll pay for it. This is part of I know that this is part of, it's going to cost me more. But it's more important for me to know where I belong and to continue to perform my duty than it is for me to leave, and then I don't know when and how I'll come back. Who knows in what shape I'll be when I come back. This is a dedication to my purpose in life. I have to take certain risks to be dedicated to perform my duties. I have to. It's just how the world is. So, I'm not saying that you have to jump off a cliff. if somebody says to you, I'll get married, but only if you jump off a cliff. No, settle. I think you should find someone else who's a little bit more stable. But there are risks all the time, and you have to be willing to take them. To fear God means to fear not taking those risks. They're manageable. These are not risks that are 50-50 or 10-90 or anything like that. These are usually negligible in the single percent or fraction of percent chance that things won't work out the way you think they will. If you need to go to...
Okay, wait a minute. Okay, so you notice that you're afraid to do something, and you shouldn't be afraid. You should only fear God. But what does that mean to only fear God? That we're going to trust in God's going to take care of us when we go do that?
Yes, because there is always a risk.
I mean, there's always a risk in everything,
right,
for sure.
Right.
I'm just trying to think
we do
with this statement to fear God.
It's not exactly I trust God. It's more that I realize that what's more important for me in my life is to perform what I need to do. Meaning, I don't want life to be long and empty. I would rather have it shorter and full than long and empty, because the purpose is not life itself. Not at this stage yet. It may be that one day it will be. But right now, it's still that life has to have meaning, it has to have content. And so if I'm giving up the essential content, then I know that this is not life. And so it's not worth averting a risk like that and running away from a risk like that just to prolong a life that in the end is not doing what it's supposed to do.
So the point is that you go and do what you're going to do, and Hashem takes care of
right.
how long we live.
Right.
So
exactly.
don't waste your time
worrying about it.
Magical thinking about I'm going
right.
to be okay if I don't take the bus.
Right. But what I'm saying is that there is fear.
Notice the fear. And
the fear is no. I'm transforming the fear. I'm transposing it. Where the fear was a fear to sustain and reduce risk, the fear should be to sustain and increase productivity, to sustain and increase meaning. And if I don't do that, that's what I should be fearful of.
Okay, so you should be fearful of not fulfilling your
right. So the fear is here. You can't run away from it. What I'm trying to say is that it's only going to get worse. If I understand what's going on correctly, it's going to get harder and harder to live a life like what you said, Thelma, that we could just ignore the media. I don't think that's realistic. I think that whether we like it or not, it's being shoved in our face, and it's going to be shoved in our face much more. And the media knows that fear sells. I don't think that media are fear mongers. They're just out to make another dollar. That's all they want. And so they know that this sells. So that's what they're going to keep selling. But it's much more than that, because the policies have become, and that's what I want to explain a little bit more, the policies have become such that they cater to the animal soul. Now, I want to explain this distinction. The two types of fear are the fear of the animal soul and the fear of the divine soul, the godly soul. The lower self and the higher self. The lower self, the animal soul, is fearful of one thing: survival. Its purpose is to survive, is to make us survive. That's what it wants. And that's good. If we didn't have an animal soul, we wouldn't make it through infanthood. Because without the animal soul, there'd be nobody to tell our mothers that we're hungry. And as we grow older, the animal soul provides us with the warnings and the signs and whatever that we need to eat, drink, sleep, so on. Those are essential ingredients. And the animal soul has that fear ingrained into it, the fear of survival, meaning the fear of survival ending. So basically it's a survival machine. And it's good. The divine soul, now let's think about it. What is the divine soul about? The divine soul is about risk. Why? It's not risk averse. It's pro-risk. How do I know this? Because where did the divine soul come from? It came from above. And it agreed to come into a physical body. Why would the divine soul agree to come into a physical body where there's so much risk that it will lose its stature? So the understanding is very simple, because the divine soul knows that by entering a physical body, it stands to gain. What is it gaining? It stands to gain a life full of good deeds, of serving God, of mitzvos, of learning Torah, and of being nice to other people. Acts of loving kindness. It stands to gain that. That is something that it can't do when it's just a soul. It has to enter into the body. So the divine soul begins life with being risk tolerant. It likes risk. It's not willing to risk everything, but yeah, you know what? It is willing to risk everything. To do a mitzvah, it's even willing to risk everything. It's a very interesting thing that the divine soul is risk tolerant, the animal soul is risk averse. And so when you switch the fears, what you're basically doing is you're switching your relationship with risk. The animal soul says, I have to be risk averse. Its fear is risk. The divine soul's fear is not taking risks in order to do a mitzvah. So I'll give an example. Somebody comes to me and says, look, there's this family that is mamish at poverty. They need 10,000 shekels right now. And I say, I don't have 10,000 shekels. So they say, well, can't you take a loan from the bank? And I say, oh, that's too risky. You know, what if they can't pay me back? So he says, so my divine soul says, what are you talking about? You know what type of a tremendous mitzvah you have here? So I know a friend, it sounds like this is crazy, but I have a friend who's a very good social worker. He's one of the best psychologists that I know. And he happens to be a Lubavitcher also. But he once, I found out about the story in an indirect way, and then I asked him about it, and he told me the whole story. The whole story was, when he was 28, he had been married, I think, for 4 years, and they had received from their parents, from both sides, something like 200,000 shekels at the time, and they were saving this up to get an apartment. So this would be the down payment, right? And then a friend from his class, from his kvutza in 770, he needed a kidney transplant, and they couldn't get a kidney. And this was, I guess, like 30 years ago, or 20 years ago. It was this whole thing of volunteer kidney donations wasn't around yet. The only place you could get a kidney was in Chutz La'aretz, was I guess in America. Philippines, I don't know. But he had to go somewhere to get the transplant. And by the way, this man is now alive, but he needed something like, at the time, something like 300,000, 400,000 shekels. Mm-hmm. So they got together all their friends, everybody they knew, and they had an evening for him. And they all donated. He gave the full 200,000 shekels that they had been saving for their down payment. They were only able to buy an apartment finally 3 years ago. But his story was, everything that I gave, I got back. Not a bit of it was left. That's risk. But look at the tremendous risk that this man is willing to take. That's the risk that comes from the divine soul, which understands the value of friendship, which understands the value of giving to a friend. It's almost mind-boggling. Imagine, would you give away your chance at an apartment at some financial stability in order to help someone? That's basically like taking the 200,000 shekels as a loan from the bank, because it's unbelievable. Now, there's many stories like this. I'm just telling you one that I happen to remember at the moment. But that's the type of fear that the divine soul has. The divine soul has a fear that I will miss out on opportunities because I'm risk averse, because I'm afraid of risk. When you're led by the divine soul, the fear is completely the opposite from the other fear. That's how different these fears are. Now, again, the point is that all the prophets say that when the redemption is near, there's going to be a lot of fear in the world. The question is, what are you fearing? You can't run away from the fear. You're going to have fear. The question is only, which type of fear are you going to have? The fear of risk or the fear of not taking risks in order to do great and important and meaningful and purposeful things in your life? Which is it going to be? Now, a non-Jew who hasn't heard about good deeds, or even a Jew who hasn't heard about good deeds and mitzvahs and helping other people, he may think that the best type of risk I can take is going to climb the Everest. That's a good risk, because that's meaningful. I'll be at the top of the world. But we can think of better things he can do with his risk. Yeah, much better things. He doesn't have to climb the Everest to feel fulfilled. He doesn't have to climb the Everest to feel content, to feel that his life has meaning. There are many better things that he can do. They also involve not a small amount of risk, and a person has to be brave in order to do them. But they're much more constructive than just climbing the Everest and maybe finishing. You know that I don't know what the numbers exactly are, but it's something like 0.5% of the people that climbed the Everest died. It's something like Corona, something ridiculous like that. In any case, so I decided that from now on, I'm not going to do it here in this with our group, but I'm going to be talking a lot about how to get over the fear that's in the world now, because I see that this is something that is plaguing everybody, including myself. And we have to learn how to transform the risk-averse fear of the animal soul into the risk-tolerant fear of the divine soul. And that's what it means to fear God. There's an interesting thing in evolution, we'll just finish with this. Rev Ginsburg likes to mention that the mutations occur at the edge of evolution. Mutations don't occur in the already finished species that already exist. The whole theory there is that mutations occur at the edge, at the very cutting edge of where things are changing. So if you take this spiritually, what it means is that for a person to be able to develop into something more than what they are, they have to reach their cutting edge. They have to be willing to break their mold at the very edge of what they are, where they feel comfortable. That cutting the mold is risky, because why would maybe I should just stay with the things that are true and tried, and I know that they work for me. Why would I break the mold? So he says, because real development happens there. It's risky, but you develop through it. Okay, so I think we'll end here.
So this is great, because in almost every conversation with any person I meet, everyone's talking about how awful the world is, and this and that and the other. We all know the litany. And the ending statement is, and we need Moshiach now.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm never happy with that ending. It feels like such a, just, there's nothing I can
Missing
do,
the point.
You know? And so this is the answer.
I think so.
There is something
That's how I
that
see
we
it.
can do. You know, everything you just talked to me about was fear-based. Can you feel the fear?
Right.
And then talk about the animal soul feel. I like this very much. It's something to open up a new dialogue.
Right. So I feel that the world needs this type of conversation now.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so Baruch Hashem.
When people say we need Moshiach now, I feel like they're just kind of throwing up their arms and saying, there's nothing I can do. I'm just waiting for Moshiach.
Right.
And true,
It
but
depends who
there's
we
more
are.
we can do.
Depends who we are.
Who they are?
Yeah, what sort of characters they're saying.
Everyone. Everyone I meet.
I'm just saying, like, people can just say it, but they're doing things, and there's other people that won't be doing.
Right. No.
Yeah, you're saying some people just say it,
Yes.
Right.
but some people say it and actually do something.
Yes.
Right, but they're still not addressing
Right.
this aspect of the fear.
Right.
And
So again, I think that the fear is here to stay for now.
yeah.
For now, there's going to be a lot of fear, and it's going to be. I mean, the way I'm talking to my children now, I've been talking to them. I've seen for many years, but now it's become more urgent, is to understand the necessity of taking risk to do great things, and not to fear that. To fear missing out, not fear of missing out, FOMO, like fear of missing out on my life, that I might not be the type of person that I could possibly be because I'm afraid to take these risks. I think I told you this many years ago already, that I felt for many years this angst inside, that I could throw out half of my life that I don't need, that I just use as comfort, and I would be a much greater person. But I'm afraid of doing it. I'm afraid of throwing that out. So I also have to overcome that fear. I have to fear more the fact that I won't be. I'll say it this way, one of the things that I was actually very afraid to go to America. I had a lot of anxiety over it. The anxiety was taking a physical toll. And the anxiety was very interesting. It had nothing to do with the fact that I'm afraid of America, or of flying, or of driving, or any of these things. I was afraid of leaving my family. And Baruch Hashem, my wife picked up on this. And the Shabbos before I was supposed to go, I wasn't feeling well. And she sat me down, she said, look, I don't know what you're feeling, but I have to tell you, I'm very happy that you're going. And I think it's a really good thing for us that you're going. And I said, really? And an hour later I came to her and said, you're a genius. You saw what I couldn't see, what I couldn't say at least. Maybe I saw it, but I couldn't say it. And you saw it, and you understood it, and then you came back with a remedy. So you know what I feel like? I feel like I'm flying in the clouds right now, because this is the thing I love the most. I love it, and this was such a good trip because I met so many people, talked to in so many places, and had so many incredible interactions, really incredible, that I don't have here every day.
That's why you went to teach in different places?
I went to do something very specific, which I did, which was a technical thing. There was a second thing that was a personal issue that a friend of ours, who was very close to Rav Ginsburg, is very, very ill, and I wanted to see him. But everything else was, okay, let's see how the time will be filled. And it was filled every single moment, I mean, on the planes, I didn't get a chance to do anything except to talk to people, and it was like a Verbringen, and the way back was like a Verbringen. It was very interesting, and I never had such an experience. But anyway, I'm just saying that I was fearful of it, because of this fear that, it's not nice that I leave my family, and what are they going to do? And then my wife says, just go, what are you talking about? It's wonderful that you're going, and in a moment I started feeling better, and everything was completely different. So I'm saying, she saw it as maybe I should be afraid of him missing out on doing this, which is again the way we need to treat each other as in marriage, right? That if you don't do this, maybe you're going to miss something out. Maybe you're not going to be the person you should be. Oh, so this course is going to cost another 5,000 shekels. Okay. Do we have it? Do we not have it? It's not interesting. If it's really something that you need to do, you need to do it. This is what's going to develop. You need to develop these things. You need to take that risk. But all the more so, you need to take risk with people and invite them over and talk with them and have a relationship with them and so on and so forth. Even though they might hurt you, okay, so what? Anyway, there's a lot more to say about this, but I think that it's an incredibly important topic. Thanks for joining, everybody.